Today, we're going to speak with Patrick Campbell, from a founder of ProfitWell that he bootstrapped and sold for $200 million. Even the sum is talking about this is already exciting. And Patrick gonna educate us on pricing. And before we do that, Patrick, if you could say a couple of words about yourself.
Yeah, totally. So Patrick Campbell, I don't know what to say after that introduction. It makes me uncomfortable. But for those of you who don't know me, my background's in econometrics and math, which makes me basically have a lot of friends as a child, clearly. And then I started my career. I worked in U.S. intelligence in D.C., worked at Google, and then jumped into the startup fray and started ProfitWell. I think it's just over 10 years now. And then, we sold just last year. So and our first product and kind of our longest going product was a product around pricing, particularly in like the SaaS and subscription space. But a lot of the lessons are very applicable outside of that community as well. And so, excited to chat. And if you have a pricing question, I've probably answered it before, and I probably have some data on it. And so might not have the data on hand, but it can always send it to you afterwards.
Patrick has a presentation for us. He will start with it. But before you do, dude, you have to tell me, how come after $200 million of bootstrapping, you don't have gray hair? What's up with that?
I don't have gray hair because I'm a young gun, man. I'm 34, so I got lucky, right? I started it early. Good genetics as well. So I got a little gray hair though. That's all right.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I'll take it. Okay.
Good deal.
Right. You want to share something? You want to share a presentation?
Yeah. So I like to set the stage with these because everyone's got their own questions typically. And so I want to make sure that, we kind of frame things up. But just as either a show of hands or like shout out, who here is not like a SaaS or software or a subscription type company? Anyone here like e-commerce or something different? Okay. So we're all software, all SaaS, all subscription all the time. Cool. Okay, that makes us a lot easier too. We don't care about marketplaces though. Everyone, no, I'm just kidding. It's all good. So, all right, let me share my screen here. And the thing with pricing, and again, been talking about pricing for quite some time here. Oh, interesting. Window. I've never shared on Riverside. Let's see how this goes. Okay, share. Can you guys see my screen? You guys see a little presentation up there? All right. I'm going to go away for a second so I can't see you. So shout it out if for some reason something breaks. But the reason I want to set the stage a little bit here is because a lot of folks know that pricing is important and they know that monetization is important. But monetization sits at the intersection of both important and uncomfortable. And whenever we have something that's like sits at that intersection, it's a recipe for not doing anything, having analysis paralysis. And my personal favorite, like reading little blog posts or little Twitter threads and being like, oh, this is what we should do. We should totally do this, even though like it might not apply to your business at all, right? And so what I want to first do is spend a couple minutes just really defining like what are we trying to do with pricing, starting from like a 30,000 foot view, and then going all the way down to like, okay, here's some specifics like that you can actually look at. And then I might stop there. If not, I kind of have a little bit of a section here where we can go through on all the different levers. And so probably talk for like 5 minutes. Sound good? We fired up? I can't see you, so I'm just going to presume everyone's going, yes, we're fired up to talk about pricing. All right. So what are we trying to do with pricing? Let's start there. So all of you have different types of businesses. All of you are kind of in the SaaS subscription space, except for that lone marketplace in the room here. But what you're trying to do is you've created some sort of value, right? For a lot of you, it's, I saw there's a waste management product that I was fascinated by when I looked it up 5 minutes ago. Some of you are doing, testimonials, kind of automation, but you've created some sort of value. And because we all play in economies that we're not trading goat for wheat anymore, you're basically saying this value that I've created is worth this much. And what's really interesting about that is the way that we can then think about pricing in a very 30,000 foot view is your pricing is basically the exchange rate on that value that you've created. And I understand that's a little fluffy, but it's a really, really good way to kind of think about it. And then if you have an exchange rate, there's a bunch of ways that you can influence it. So if we go one step down here everything in your business, and it doesn't, again, matter what type of business you are. You could be a nonprofit, you could be an e-commerce business, but everything in your business is used to drive someone to the point of conversion or to justify the product or the price that you're offering. That price sits basically at the nexus of that particular relationship with the customer. And what this means is, for that exchange rate that we just talked about, is that when you're thinking about that value that you have, it's really, really heavily influenced by who you sell to. You can go up market and all of a sudden your willingness to pay goes dramatically up. The requirements of your product probably go up as well, but all of a sudden you can go into a different market and the willingness to pay is there. You could go into a different, like, actual vertical, meaning you were selling to soccer moms and dads and now you're selling to small businesses, and all of a sudden the product stays exactly the same and the value differential changes completely, right? So that customer that you're going after is really, really important. Obviously, you can change the product. We can not only add features, subtract features, change up tiers, all that kind of fun stuff, but we can also change how we charge, right? We can charge based on, the number of videos that we have inside the product. We can charge based on the number of users. There's a whole host of different things. And then obviously there's the actual price point. The price point not only does impact conversion, but in the world of SaaS and subscriptions, mainly because the value is a little bit more amorphous than for a physical good or something that's a little bit more commoditized, the price not only impacts conversion, but it also impacts the brand that your product has. And so it's one of those things that the reason I'm kind of going through this one layer down is that there's a lot of different things that are involved with your pricing. It's not just that number. It has everything to do, obviously, with your product, how your product is structured, and ultimately who you're actually selling to, those segments that you're choosing. Now, if we go one layer down and we're starting to get to the bottom layer here, the way to kind of think about pricing is, if you're doing well or not so well at pricing, is it all comes down to the revenue per customer. So that's the metric that you want to latch onto when you're thinking about pricing. You're going to measure that in a bunch of different ways. A lot of you are going to use ARPU, average revenue per user, or account, ACV. It matters how you measure it for your business, but it doesn't really matter from a pricing perspective. When we're looking at doing pricing well, we want that revenue per customer basically going up over time. It's never going to be going up every single month necessarily, because pricing doesn't move really, really quickly like, growth or conversion on the acquisition side can. But it is one of those things to kind of think about. And to go to the final rail here, there's a lot of different things that influence that revenue per customer. And it's more than just listed here. Some of these things are easy. Some of these things are hard. On the easy side, just doing a straight up price increase. I got an email template on how to actually increase or change your prices that we can go through if someone's interested in that. Your add-on strategy, one of the most underutilized aspects of all of SaaS and subscription pricing is just add-ons, selling more stuff to those particular users. And then there's these harder things that can influence that revenue per customer. Going up market. Used to be this was the playbook. If you're getting advice from someone who was in the SaaS game 20 years ago, this is what they'll talk to you about. Hey, go up market, go up market. It's not as easy as it once was. Same thing with feature differentiation. We're all shipping so much stuff, for the lack of a better phrase, that features just pound for pound are actually worth less than they were 10, 15 years ago. But the biggest thing that really comes down to is making sure that on, I would say, a quarterly basis, and that's a little bit of a controversial statement, you are doing some sort of experimentation to attack one of these particular levers that influences that revenue per customer. And a lot of times it's just realizing, as I kind of wanted to start with this, that, hey, there's this basic world where we all look at the number, but in actuality, there's a lot of other things that can influence that revenue per customer that have nothing to do with the specific number that you're talking about when it comes to your price. So I'm going to pause there. Hopefully that was not confusing. Hopefully that was helpful to kind of understand and set the stage. Big TLDR, I'll say it one more time, is, again, anything that influences revenue per customer, and sometimes it'll also have another effect on, how many customers you're getting or your retention rate. All of these things have to work together. But anything that influences your revenue per customer directly, that's something that you're attacking with monetization. It's not just that number. So is that helpful? We feel good? Thumbs up if we feel good. Thumbs down if we're confused. All right. Anyone going to admit they're confused? Okay, I don't think so. All right. What we can do is I can make this a little bit more concrete. So I have a couple of slides on all right, here's where most people start and then here's what they add, then they add this, then this is what the big dogs end up doing with their pricing, so on and so forth. I can go through those slides, or we can jump right to Q&A.
I think
Who wants to jump?
One of the questions that I have, and I'm sure like a lot of have, if you haven't done a lot, like where do you start, and what is a better what is a better start point?
So let me jump to that. Let me do that. It'll take probably 5 minutes here. Entire screen 2. All right. I can no longer see you. Yell if there's an issue. Okay. So let's go through the evolution of pricing. And this is very, very like SaaS specific, but you're all smart. So if you're not pure SaaS, you can kind of extrapolate out the lessons here. This is where most pricing starts. We start with, oh my God, I have to ship it. I'm going to put it on Product Hunt tomorrow. Or, oh my God, I'm going to send the email tomorrow. The product's finally ready. What should I do? Well, Basecamp or some random indie hacker I look up to put one price on their page. That's what I should do. Now, the problem here, as you can kind of see with me joking a little bit, is that this is a fine place to start. You don't have a lot. You're just trying to get something out here. But as we kind of talked about in the preamble there, obviously you have multiple different types of people. And what most people find when they only have one plan is you're too expensive for some people, you're way too cheap for others. And way too cheap doesn't necessarily mean that they convert and you just get less money. Way too cheap can be they look at the product and they don't even convert. I've, helped out and mentored a number of folks out of like Eastern Europe, and their prices are always notoriously too low because the cost and standard of living is very different. And plenty of stories, not only from Eastern European companies, but US companies where they double, triple their price. And all of a sudden, not only their revenue per customer goes up, but their conversion rate goes up. But the point that I'm really trying to make here is eventually you start to realize, oh, we have different types of customers. And so you're like, cool, let's do this good, better, best thing, right? We're going to have this feature here. Maybe we throw in an integration. Maybe we put SSO up here on the top. And then you're like, you know what? I read that Harvard Business Review article, and you know what it told me to do? It told me to add an enterprise tier. So that's what you end up doing, right? And this is where I would say this is a better place to start. I think most of you have already started, so this isn't something that's really applicable. But this is a decent place to be at. Oh. Okay. Everyone but you. How dare you interrupt my flow? No, I'm just kidding. Cool. If you can't, that was exactly what to do. If there's an issue, you can't hear me or see me anymore, shout it out because I can't see you guys anymore. But anyways, so we're at good, better, best plus enterprise. And what normally ends up happening is, and some of you might be here, you don't necessarily have like the true differentiation that you think you do. Like it's kind of weak. What's the difference between good and better? And so the thing that most of you should start with, or you should get to immediately, is a little bit more definition around who you're actually selling to. So what I mean by that is you should really understand from like a persona or a segment perspective, or however you want to define how you separate out the different types of buyers that you have. What do the people in this $99 tier actually really, really want versus the people in the $4.99 versus the people in the $9.99? I know it's a little nuance, and you might be sitting there thinking, well, I know exactly what it is. Well, a lot of times you think you do, but you haven't done actually any research on who those people are, both qualitative and quantitative. And it's one of those things to like really, really make sure you have some true differentiation. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is what some of the big dogs do, and some of you already might be there in terms of your mindset based on what we've talked about, is that you might realize it's like, well, we don't have just 3 types of buyers. We have 8 different types of buyers, or there's 3 types, but they branch off into a bunch of different sub-buyers. And this is where a lot of people who are a lot more advanced, they'll have what are called basically shadow tiers. So to kind of talk through this a little bit, what shadow tiers basically are when you have like, let's say 8 different types of segments. And again, they might be like sub-segments. So someone comes in, they don't perfectly fit into the $4.99 plan, but they're actually a really good customer, and there's this like weird little cohort of customers that's better at $2.99 or $6.99 or whatever, direction makes the most sense. So you're not necessarily displaying all 8 tiers or all 10 tiers, But what you're doing is you're displaying the 3 tiers. That customer comes in either on a trial or they end up paying for the product as it is. And then based on behavior or learning about them more, you then upgrade them or downgrade them depending on the activity to one of these shadow tiers. And the reason I bring this point up is because there's this debate that I think it's well intentioned but not really as effective around like, well, the more tiers you have, the more complicated it is, and conversion's affected, and everything's terrible, right? To give you some data, the fastest growing subscription mobile apps, so where you have the least amount of real estate, they actually have, so the upper quartile of growth. So I took, 1,000 companies. It was more than 1,000 companies, but just for the sake, I took 1,000 companies. I took the 250 fastest, the upper quartile, and I wanted to see how many tiers they had. That group had 12 and a half tiers or more. Now, you as a user never see more than 1, maybe 2 or 3 tiers at any one time. You come in on a particular tier that's really simple, then based on behavior, they give you an upgrade path. The same data for B2B SaaS, I believe it was 15 or more tiers. Again, a user never sees them, all at one point, but it is one of those things to think about that, like, pricing should be simple or as simple as possible to the customer and to your sales team, but it doesn't necessarily have to be simple in the middle of that. There's a lot of ways you can simplify it for the experience and then do a lot of engineering in the middle of there. Now, a good way to kind of make this easy, if you're not quite at the ability to like really bifurcate your tiers down this way, is using what's called a pricing or a value metric. So this is where I would say most of you should start with. So if you don't have a metric that differentiates your tiers, this is the thing that you should drop everything. It's the number one thing that you should be doing after this particular call, because you can have everything else not great about your pricing, but if you get your value metric right, meaning charging based on per user, per 100 visits, per 500 API calls, whatever it is, there's a lot of decisions to be made, whether you do it on an incremental basis or a bin or, separate it out as you're seeing here on the page. But if you get everything else wrong, but you get this somewhat right, it saves your pricing considerably. Because what's happening is you're going to have natural people, or people are naturally going to upgrade from one tier to another. That's what's getting your expansion revenue. But you're also going to have a really big lead like Disney come in and pay a different price than a Johnny or Jane startup that comes in because they're using or they're consuming very, very different needs. If you want to go deeper on value metrics, I have a couple slides here. I'm not going to go through it right now. We can save that for the Q&A. But basically, all the numbers are better. So all the numbers are better. Your expansion revenue is better. Your CAC is better. All kinds of things. As people get more sophisticated, they not only have shadow tiers, but they also have add-ons. Add-ons, typically what you'll see is customers who have at least one add-on, they normally have about 20 to 50% higher lifetime value. The reason for that is because they're not only paying you more because they're paying for a particular add-on, but also because they typically retain at a much better rate. Their churn rates are much, much better because they're more engrossed within your product. Now, the reason that this is really powerful as well is because these are relatively easy. Every single person on the call today can sell priority support. I don't care if you're a $10 consumer product, you can charge $1 for priority support just so that when someone's email comes in, it just goes to the front of the queue. Normally, you should collect some data, but normally you can charge about 10%, maybe up to 20% of your core product price for priority support. And there's just a group of people, I've seen enough pricing data at this point, there's a group of people that they just want their email or their phone call answered first, and they're willing to pay for it. It's not the majority of your customers, but again, think about it. Even if you're that $10 product, an extra $1 for just routing their email directly to the front of the line, that's pure profit. It's an add-on. You could probably build it in Zendesk or something like that, whatever you're using. But add-ons are also powerful because they're not full-featured products. They're just like stuff you probably bundled into your product already that really people, it's not that they don't care, but the people who care about it are willing to pay for it. So it's better to pull that feature out and make it into an add-on rather than to bundle it. Couple of last things here, like the super sophisticated get to price localization. So making sure that you're basically charging not only based on the currency of the customer where they are, but also doing demand-based localization in different regions. I can tell you right now, like the Nordics, they're willing to pay about 30% more than the US, sight unseen for a product. Southeast Asia, it's about 40% less. The variances do get pretty high depending on your product, so you should actually look at your own data. But I can tell you, like a privacy-orientated product in the Nordics, typically the willingness to pay is like 80 to 90% higher than the US, just as an example. But this is one of those things that, like, once you have some of your, like, let's just say over 5 to maybe 10% of your traffic outside of your home region. So some European startups, like, or companies, like this is from like day one. You have to start localization. US, it's normally around Series C, although that's, getting pulled forward, every single day. But it's something that's really, really powerful. Yeah, and so that's kind of like these different levers just to give you a play here. We didn't talk about like freemium. We didn't talk about some of these other things or discounting strategy, but we can get to those in the Q&A. And then I'm happy to get into the email template and kind of strategy on changing your pricing overall, because that's one that people like to steal as well. So yeah, helpful, thumbs up if helpful, thumbs down if not. All right, I will hunt you down if I don't see, and give you value. I'm not going to hunt down and hurt you, but I will be like, all right, Mike, you and I are going to talk for a half hour until you get value. So that's how you can bait me into getting on a call with you, is saying I didn't provide value. All right, cool. Alexander, we good? Want to do some Q&A? I can keep going. I got slides on pricing for days, so I can.
I want to dive into a couple of questions and then let everyone ask questions. So you said about that if we have not, if the company has not defined the value metric, they should do this right away. And what is the framework to do that? Because most of founders over here already have some revenue and they're set in their ways, and like what is the framework of changing it? How to look at it properly?
Yeah, for a value metric, let me just take you through. I got a slide or two on that. So let me find it. So the basic idea is, so before I show that slide, so if you remember back to your like econ class in college or high school, remember the professor or the teacher put up a demand curve, right? And he or she was like, if you put this point, you're going to sell this much, and this is how much revenue you're going to have, is the area underneath that curve, right? Well, what you're doing with a value metric is you're presumably having points or dots everywhere on that curve, right? Because you're selling your product for $1,000 to Disney, you're selling it for $999 to who's incrementally smaller than Disney, I don't know, and then you're selling it to, a startup for $10, right? Because they're all consuming, like Disney might be consuming 10,000 widgets of your product or using 10,000 users to make it more concrete, and the startup might be using one user, right? So you're basically getting all those different points in the demand curve. And so to give you some data that's not math theory or econ theory, if we just take a look at this, so this is growth rates for value metric-based pricing in the goldenrod, and then feature differentiated pricing in whatever other color that is, the lower numbers. And what you're looking at is basically growth is much higher for pricing or value metric-based companies, and the reason is because churn tends to be about half. And I can share all this data if you'd like it. But churn tends to be about half because you'll see more downgrades, but people will like downgrade because they're like, oh, I'm only using 5 seats now. But you don't get as much churn because people have an option to pay less rather than just leave, which is oftentimes what people end up doing when they feel like they're paying for more than they're actually getting, which is a huge problem with feature differentiated pricing, and also some like old school SaaS pricing, but we don't need to get into that. But more importantly, the expansion revenue is about double. So instead of having, and this is the hack, like instead of having to be like, hey, user, there's this really cool feature in this next tier up, would you like to use it? Which is like another sales process. You can go, hey, congratulations, you guys must be crushing it. You guys had 100 testimonials last month. Now you got 150. We're just going to bump you up to the 150 testimonial tier. But if there's an issue, just let us know. It's a very assumptive like upgrade. It's a forced upgrade rather than like, and some people will go, oh my God, I'm just going to delete those other ones, but it's really, really rare. And you should be transparent about it. There are companies that tend not to be transparent about these forced upgrades, but there's always backlash down the road somewhere. But the framework, just to answer your question. The first question is, what is the perfect measure of value for your product? So if we're talking about HubSpot, marketing automation product, the perfect measure of value of if HubSpot is providing you actual value is the amount of money that you make through HubSpot. Most of you are B2B, so it's going to be the money that they make from your product, the money they save from your product, the time they save, or the time that they get back, which is kind of the same as saving it, but people think of that a little bit differently. Now, if you can measure this metric and your customer agrees to the measurement, this is how you should price. So for our retained product, which reduces churn, we can measure how much churn we reduced, and we can get the customer to agree to the measurement because we have this analytics, this financial analytics tool with ProfitWell. And so that's how we charge. And that's known as a perfect value metric. Now, only about 10%, it's kind of an anecdotal number, only about 10% of companies can actually do that. So for everyone else, you want to understand your perfect value metric, and then you want to think of what are 5 to 10 proxies for that metric. So for HubSpot, the amount of money that you make through HubSpot, it's number of contacts, number of visits, number of web pages, number of users, number of features. Normally there's like a top 3, and you got to like really strain yourself to think of the other couple. And then what I want to do is I want to go to actually our customers or our prospects, depending on where you are, and I want to ask a couple of questions. So the first question I want to ask is basically like, hey, we're thinking of product A's pricing. Of the list, what's the preferred and what's the most preferred and what's the least preferred? That's a max diff question. It's a really powerful methodology question because you're forcing the respond to make a decision. So in this case, I would show them, price based on number of contests, price based on visits, price based on web pages, etc. And you'll see a most and least. There's a couple other questions I would want to ask around like willingness to pay, because I want to make sure that I don't fall into a trap where everyone says users, but people with a lot of users don't want to pay more than people with a little amount of users. So I want to ask some questions around that. And then the final thing I want to do is a histogram analysis, which is something you learned in 5th grade, probably forgot how to do it. There's lots of tutorials online. But basically all you do is you look at, so let's say it's users, everyone says users. I want to look at, okay, I want to make sure that people paying a lot have a lot of users, because there's some products where they only need one user and everyone prefers users. And then you're kind of in a situation where you have to make a judgment call. Now, I would say for most products, it's really obvious what the people prefer. Maybe there's a 1 or 2, like there's a top 1 and 2, but it's like very obvious they're number 1 and number 2. And then when you do the histogram analysis, it does show that scaling. And then, you kind of know what to pick. And then you kind of have to pick, like, do I do it incrementally, like they pay for every contact, which you really can only do with more technical products because non-technical folks don't really like paying in a very nickel and dime type way. Or do I want to give, like, you pay for every 40 or 50 contacts, which is basically what HubSpot does? Or do I want to put together 3 tiers or 4 tiers or whatever, where tier 1 gives you up to 1,000, tier 2 gives you 1,001 to 5,000, tier 3 gives you, up to 20,000, and then you have to contact us for enterprise. That's kind of the final decision. Now, when you have a product, like an analytics product, this is one of the reasons ProfitWell ended up being free. When you have an analytics product, the preference is all over the place. Some people want you to do it based on users. Some people want you to do it based on the amount of data or the size. Other people want you to do it based on like API calls, even though there's no API, which is really fascinating. And so that is a really big conundrum. So some of you will have a big conundrum where you kind of have to pick not only the momentum that you want to go after. So for us, if we were going to price, we probably would pick, based on the amount of data you have, which is really problematic. This is why ProfitWell ended up being free, because we just didn't want to go after that, but some of you are going to have to. And you kind of have to pick that battle. And normally when you segment the data, you should always be segmenting data. Normally when you segment data, it starts to reveal that there's like one type of customer you want, and that customer looks a certain way, and then the other types of customers you can kind of ignore. But that's the framework for coming up with this. There's a lot of little micro decisions that you end up having to have, but that's how I think of that value metric.
I think we'll go the next way. If you want to ask a question, just put a plus in the comments, and I'll call you out. We'll start with Charlie.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up, man?
Nice. Thank you for going over all that. Actually, I kind of an inverse question from what you had on the slide about, obviously moving up market being hard. What about in the inverse, where you have an enterprise or, larger scale deployment software, and you're actually trying to move maybe to a slimmed down version of that, but you are maybe worried about cannibalizing some of those really big customers that you acquire?
Yeah. You're bootstrapped, right?
That's correct.
Okay. The reason I ask is because when you're trying, so there's a couple of models that people use to expand up down market. Normally, a heavily venture-backed company can go mid and then out. So they'll go mid. This is kind of, I use HubSpot as an example. This is what HubSpot did. They went mid, and then they kind of came down a little bit and then cut off how far down they went because they kind of gave that to Infusionsoft or whatever they're called today. And then they wiped that out with their free plan eventually. And then they like slowly went up market, but then they kind of abandoned like the Demandware crowd, right? So they kind of like expanded until they found some bounds. It's really expensive because you get what you just talked about, which is like you're constantly biting off different CAC that is expensive on both sides because you spend a lot of time with a low end lead who's just not willing to pay. You don't necessarily have the feature packaging for the low end yet. And then same thing on the high end, right? So this is where value metrics can help you a lot because theoretically, if you don't have the features that are down, you can just offer like, well, you only get 10 of widgets or what's its with this plan. And none of your larger customers want that because they want 100 of the widgets or what's its or whatever you're including. The other models that people use are they go up and not necessarily like 2 customers total enterprise, but like they go higher in the market, more premium and come down. And the way they do that is they'll slowly like lower the lowest tier in terms of value metric, like I just described. And then some of those tiers, they'll start taking out features. So like then eventually it'll be like a bare bones at the lowest point. And then the other way is the opposite. Start at the bottom, cheap, not free, but cheap, and then going up. So I would recommend for like a bootstrap company, if you have the value metric, that's the easiest way to do it. What I have seen work somewhat is you have your premium product, and then all of a sudden you add essentially like a free product, like a very product-led growth at the bottom, not necessarily free, but maybe considerably less, so cheap that it like clearly is not for your current customers. Sometimes people do a different brand for this. It should be a separate brand when like, it could be a sub brand, right? So it's like, I don't know, I'm going to make brand names up. What are the things I'm seeing? There's Blink, and then there's like Shutter by Blink and Big by Blink. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? Like it's like it's all Blink, but it's like you got two different sub brands, and that can kind of like make it a little bit easier. That's still a lot harder. It's easier just to keep one brand and then just like call the actual tiers something different. Like I think you're the guy who's doing, which is fascinating. I looked at it before the call and it's like, it's really cool. I love those little niches. Like no one wants to build. There's no like 22-year-old who's like, I want to for it, right?
I was one day.
I love those spaces. I know, that's what I'm saying, right? So there might be something called the rural plan. Like it's the rural plan. It's like, clearly I'm not rural. I'm the big city of Cincinnati. So this doesn't make sense for me. That's a way that you can kind of do that. You do have to be careful with like the split strategy. You have to be very disciplined on your go-to-market because your high end, that's how you're trained right now. Those are different salespeople. Those are different motions. That's different marketing. There's different content that appeals to them, different sales messaging. So normally you almost want to treat it like a separate company, but you can't go too far. So it's like a good balance. But that's kind of how I think about it. Yeah.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me explain what I would do, like not in your position, and then what I would do to get out of your position, because I think those might be a little two different things. Like unlimited anything has to be purely for marketing. So what I mean by that is like ProfitWell, you can have unlimited users. It's a free product. Unlimited doesn't really matter. But you could have unlimited users, right? It's like, hey, we give you unlimited users, right? And so it's like a marketing thing. We're not charging based on it. We don't care if you have, we care if you have more users because it helps other metrics and stuff, but like, it's just marketing. So in this case, like you have a product that theoretically started off, I don't know the history of your company, but like maybe that was like your differentiator that you did unlimited and other people did like, limits. What you need to do is you need to find something that they care about that's only available on those upper tiers. So I don't know what that is. Maybe it's like certain rights restrictions, things at that high of the market. It's normally like legal and CIO and COO type stuff that people care about. Sometimes it's security, but security is being a little more commoditized across most software at this point. So that's a little bit harder one to do. So yeah, you got to find something like, And fair use limits normally aren't great because think about what you're doing. It's like on your website it says unlimited, but down in this 5 print you said unlimited really means 100,000, and then they're like, well, we're using more, but you didn't tell us. And then all of a sudden your price is like 1,000x, right? That just is not a good situation. So I would find something where it's like, I would find something that you can give them that they really care about, where they would just not obviously use the lower end tiers. The alternative is you get rid of unlimited. Now I know that's scary, and again, I don't know enough about your business, but some people who made their business off unlimited because the incumbents didn't do unlimited, they think that they have to ride that wave forever. Sometimes they do because the incumbents are just there. But other times, like, you made your point, your funnels are all set up, and if you just get rid of that unlimited and make it a number that like feels unlimited to me but doesn't feel unlimited to the big dogs, nothing will change about your funnel. And so that can happen. And I've also seen where you get rid of unlimited and all of a sudden everything gets bad. So you got to be careful with that. But the way up the mountain is probably trying to find the thing that they care about, because there's plenty of stuff they care about that you probably don't even have to build. It's just more compliancy stuff that they're going to care about, because those companies tend to care about those things. One thing I didn't mention about the price increase, to give you guys a little more confidence as well, most price increases, what you'll see on churn is you'll see churn go up a bit, not dramatically, but it will go up. And then churn will actually go lower than it was prior to the pricing change, because what you did is you just pulled forward some of that churn. So you had some people who are going to churn in the next couple of months, and then this is their excuse to leave you. And then if you don't change anything about your funnel, your churn will probably go right back up to where it was before. Because churn is more of a product value problem from a strategic standpoint, assuming you have your mechanical and tactical churn kind of taken care of. But that sparked me based on the unlimited comment. Well, so freemium doesn't really increase ARPU. Freemium is an acquisition model. It's not a revenue model. You want to think about it like a premium ebook. So freemium, you open up, and you got to be careful, because if you have an already commoditized product and you add free, all of a sudden it's not that it's cannibalizing the attention, not necessarily cannibalizing the usage, or it's like it's so close to what they need, they don't necessarily need what's in the paid tier. So I'm going to put freemium over here, because we could talk about freemium for an hour, and I think freemium is the future, by the way. Like, you have no better product or no better content than your product. And I think as things get more and more competitive, the only channel that is increasing in efficiency, or the only, like, it's not really a channel, but it's sort of a channel. The only channel that's increasing in efficiency is freemium. Everything else decreasing efficiency. Content, SEO, paid ads, everything's decreasing efficiency. The only one that's more efficient is freemium. So to answer that question, whenever you have a commoditized space, or whenever you're in a commoditized place, you have one of 2 or 3 choices. The first choice, if you can't beat them, join them. And what I mean by that is go free. Like, you're already commoditized, just fuck the market. That's the way to go. And then all of a sudden, now the problem is, now you have to find something to monetize, right? And so you're basically finding a different monetization strategy, and you're taking advantage of all this energy coming in. And there's a bunch of ways. You don't have to do this overnight. Like, you can, we're going to call the free plan something else, and it doesn't include this one thing, so your legacy customers will stay on the legacy paid plan as you transition into this new feature. There's a bunch of ways around it. But you just jump to the end. You commoditize the market completely, and you have to find another way to monetize. But theoretically, you now have a huge lead list that can convert really, really well. The second thing is add-ons or additional products. So add-ons are like more features that you sell separately, and then additional products are like full-blown stuff. So you look at Square. You go to Square's like product page. They have like 14 to 16 different products. There's they have the payments, which is fully commoditized. That's their commoditization. They made it basically free. It's at the rail. And then they have time tracking, the POS system. They have a bunch of different things. So you could build a full-fledged additional product. And the advantage of this market, it's so wide and fragmented. If you're a bootstrap company, you can build your own POS. It might not have near the functionality as Square, but like people will buy it because there's so many of them, and people will buy it because they like the color of it. They will buy it because like random stuff. Like, that's the type of market where that happens. But it's add-ons and other products. And then the third way is premium. There can only be one market cost leader just by logic, right? There can only be one person who's the cheapest. And if you're not the cheapest, why play the cheapest game, right? Like why try to be close to the cheapest? You're not the cheapest. And if people care about the price, they're just going to go with the cheapest. So what you can do is you can just go with like, cool, we're going to be premium, right? So that's such a advantage when you're like, I'm not going to be the cost leader. Therefore, I can increase my price and go after this type of customer. And I'm going to play in this game, and I'm going to build features for this particular game. But those are really the three vectors that you have. And the first two are kind of the same, just with like a little asterisk on it. But you can sell to more people. You can sell them more stuff, and you can keep them. Yeah, it's basically it. So yeah, that's kind of how I would think about it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. So if that doesn't spark like a couple ideas to go chase down, just send me the URL of your company via email, and I'll look at your website and be like, oh yeah, think of this company, or I've seen this. I've seen so many SaaS companies. There's always like, yeah, they do this in this space, which is kind of similar, like that kind of thing. So markets like that, like the help desk market, markets where the logo TAM is almost infinite. Like there's just so many. It's more of a game of like constantly finding product market fit with every single feature, and like really honing in on who that customer is, because you can get spread so thin. Like think of what Square has to do. They have so many customers, and like just think of doing personas. They don't even do personas. The way they do it, and we help them with this, just full disclosure, but can't tell you all the secrets, but can tell you some secrets, is like basically like their personas are split based on like use. So this the lead use, this is POS. The lead use is the POS. This is what that type of buyer looks like. The lead use is payments. This is what that type of buyer looks like. So on and so forth. So it's just something to think about. Yeah. So longer sales cycles mean you can't do like traditional A/B or multivariate testing, unless you have, the technical term is, a crap ton of traffic. So like Amazon can do like an A/B test in 30 seconds, not even, because of so much traffic and so many buyers. So what I would do is I would do more of your research up front and try to bring your research down to like one central question, meaning like, okay, we want to set up our prices in Western Europe, right? Or the UK. Let's just say the UK, and we want to set our prices at this level. What I then do is do more of like a before and after test, where it's not as clean as like a multivariate or an A/B test, but basically like, we did our research. We have confidence that we can charge £100 in the UK and $50 in the US. We feel confident, or confident enough. Let's try it for a sales cycle, or maybe 2 sales cycles, and then we'll see what happens. And then like we'll set like, hey, we are expecting conversion to drop a bit. And then we can look at like, if you really want to do it very cleanly, you'll also go through a retention cycle of some sort. So all of a sudden you're like, is my LTV higher in this case? And normally you can tell pretty quickly. Like there's not a disaster. Like what happens normally is like, all right, my conversion went down, my ARPU went up, LTV seems to be much, much better. Okay, like it looks good, we're going to keep going. Or it's like, oh my God, we must have missed something. Oh my God, like take it back, right? And so that's one of those things that you can kind of do. And in that case, normally you don't go to existing customers and change it. Normally you just do this for new customers, see what happens, and then kind of roll forward with that. The marketplace asterisk on this is like, localization can get really tough if the marketplace is connecting like people over borders. You might not be able to do it as much, and that presents its own problem. So you just got to be careful with that asterisk. It just depends. A lot of SaaS software, you can do this. Only when teams are global is it really hard to do localization at that point. So it's like, you got to be careful too, because it's like, you don't want to go too long. Because it's not even externally, it's just your internal sales team, depending on the size of the product, but people get antsy and stuff. And pricing, because there ends up being a lot of ambiguity in it, it becomes an excuse as to why something is or isn't working. Like your sales team, I'm sure like anyone who's at a sales team, it's like, oh, it's it's priced too high, or, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it can't always be priced too high, right? Like it just doesn't work that way. So you just got to be careful with how long you let the ambiguity hold. But yeah, sounds good. So there's like 2 questions there. Depends on like where you want to take it. So on one hand, it's like, what should your like the standard duration is a month, right? 30 days, right? Or 28 days, depending. Like, there's a lot of people who will change it to 28 days because you get like almost half a billing cycle, across the year, which gets really interesting. I think that establishing that cycle depends on like the consistency of the value. So what I mean by that is the beauty of the subscription model is that you're baking the relationship with the customer directly into how you make money, right? So if this is a product that is being used every day or a consistent basis, whether it's active usage or in like the background, right? Meaning like they're not logging in every day, but they're getting the value like roughly every day. Monthly is just this point that we chose, as a society, as a life, and we go there. Now you can play with that where it's like, hey, the value is actually over a year when they have to get set up. So they're not necessarily getting the value for a month and a half. And then they're going to get a lot of value in month 3 and 4. And you kind of even that value out because it is that exchange. But there are some products where I really only get value from a week to week basis and I don't need it every week. So paying for like on a weekly basis makes sense. Now, if you have kind of a standard SaaS product where there's like always some value, and before you overthink it, like just having value in, just having your data inside whatever app it is valuable as well, even if they're not getting new data every single day. So there is some value there. You want to optimize for longer term. Lifetime value just tends to be much, much higher. And so what I always recommend doing is if you have if you have a product like HubSpot where there's a bunch of setup and a bunch of other stuff that takes place, and then you get the value and then you get lock-in, you might want to force an annual contract. Just, hey, you just have to pay for our product via value. But they're making a very conscious choice. They're like, this is the one product we're going to use for all of this, right? It's not like a little like extra marketing tool they're using or an extra sales tool. It's like, this is the center of this entire team is going to be this product. If you don't have one of those products, then it's a little bit harder. And then from there, I think that what you can then see is if you have a monthly type product, there's a bunch of campaigns you can do every like 45, 60 days to take those people who are on their second month up to about their 10th month and try to get them on an annual plan. Once they're on their 10th month, they're kind of with you for a long time. It depends on your product. Like really you're looking for once they're at like 80% of your lifetime value, they're going to stick around for a while. But yeah, I would go to them every 45 days and basically be like, hey, like we have this annual plan. We'll give you a month off or 2 months off. There's a lot of products you don't really need to go over 2 months. Really, you don't need to go over 1 month. That's something to actually test. But I would try to get those monthlies onto annuals. I have some data. I've published it here and there. Basically, what proportion of customers should you have on like longer term plans? If you're like a $10 product, 60+% of your customers should be on your annual plan, normally because it's about $100, which people are more than happy to swipe their credit card. And then if you have like $1,000 a month or more product, you should also have about 60%. Normally that's because you're forcing it. And that's where a lot of companies are doing. And then it kind of goes down like this in between those two numbers and then back up. So yeah, just to give you some benchmarks. Hopefully that answered your questions and didn't just pontificate about terms and things like that. I'm Paticus on Twitter, Patticus. If you have a question on pricing you don't want to put publicly, I'm just pc@paticus.com. This is a small enough group that I feel comfortable giving out my email address. And most of you already have it, I think. So that works out really well. Yeah, I'm always up for helping. So yeah, if I can be helpful, just let me know.